Welcome, everyone. I can see that people are flowing into this virtual room, so I'll make a start. This is the first event in the very first online and international version of Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival. We usually meet face-to-face in September, but here we are online, given the situation, it's all we can do, and very enjoyable it is too. We have a wealth of wonderful international guests. My name is Catherine Dupelou-Ménager, and I'm the Artistic Director of Bad Sydney. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. Regardless of where you're watching from today, we recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture, and we pay our respects to their owners, to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now to our launch event. I have the greatest pleasure in welcoming Joe Nesbø. I can't resist saying his name because I've been working hard at this, his name in Norwegian, Nesbø, but I think we'll stick to Joe because it's a bit easier. You all know his name and you all know his work. He'll be interviewed by crime fiction specialist, Senior Professor Sue Turnbull from the University of Wollongong. Welcome, Sue. And one of Joe's countrymen, the Norwegian ambassador, Paul Gulleik Larsen, will introduce you very briefly. But first, I want to let you know how we'll be running this event. The audience sound and video has been muted. Sue and Joe will talk for about 45 to 50 minutes. Hold on to your questions. Sue will remind you about 40 minutes in that you can send them through using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. Sue will ask as many of your questions as she can get through, and I will come back at the end to thank our speakers. I'll now hand over to His Excellency to introduce you very briefly.
Thank you very much for inviting me to introduce you here at Bad Sydney. It's a great pleasure. Of course, you is one of the most well-known Norwegian names in the world of books, and I had the pleasure of meeting him first time in 1997 in Oslo, before he became famous, just after his first Harry Hole book was published in Norway, The Bat, as you know, which was conceived and set here in Sydney after Jo had visited my good friend and colleague Espen Larsen, who was posted to our embassy in Canberra in the early 90s. And you invited me kindly to lunch, and we talked about my experience as a diplomat in former Yugoslavia. And I realized how seriously you takes his research into his novels, which is surely a very important ingredient in his success. A striking thing which was noted by critics and Harry Hole himself as he came to Yugoslavia, to Australia in The Bat, is how similar Australians and Norwegians are, in spite of us being located on opposite sides of the world. We have so much in common. We are allies in defense and fighting for freedom and democracy, and our countries are among the most successful political economies in the world. And on the people-to-people level, we love to visit each other and to interact. We both love sports, nature, outdoors, popular culture, whether it's music, art, and literature. And in fact, Yu has a history and a stake in many of these areas. He's an economist, he's a rock climber and former football player, European football, not Australian. And he's a frontman in a rock band called De Derre, which I guess Yu means those guys in English. And of course, a great writer. So I'm very happy to introduce him, to be here at Bad Sydney. Looking forward to come to Sydney, hopefully in November physically, and to give the floor over to you, and who's now one of our most favorite writers, most famous, in now one of the most favorite cities of us in the world, in Sydney.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I didn't realize you'd met before. There we are, small world. I will now leave the floor to you and to Sue. Off you go.
And I was going to actually start with The Bat, because there's quite a bit of a shift from the bat to the knife, the latest Harry Hole, or I think if we were really going to translate it, it would be Harry Hill, wouldn't it? That would be the English translation. It would be something like Harry Hill. So I want to ask you, we've heard the story of origin of Harry Hole being invented, as it were, on a long haul flight from Oslo to Sydney, and when you were supposed to be writing a kind of piece about being on the road with a band, and it didn't quite pan out. So there was Harry. Where did Harry come from originally? What were you reading? What were you thinking? What idea did you have? Did you know he was going to be a series character?
I definitely had no idea he was going to be in more than one book. Actually, I had no idea he was going to be in a published book. For me, writing about Harry when I arrived in Sydney in 1997, my aim was to write something that would catch the eye of a publisher that had, like you said, approached me, asked me if I could write something about the band I played in. So it was like a test piece, so I wrote this novel that was basically the bat in 5 weeks while staying in Sydney. So it meant I got totally hooked on writing. So I did go around and see a bit of Sydney, but it was all for research for the book. So it was sort of a strange first visit to Australia, because I was like feeling I was following in the footsteps of this Norwegian policeman that had been sent to Sydney to investigate the murder of a young Norwegian girl. But how the character came about, it's always, when you get asked questions like that, you try to look back and you come up with an answer, and then when you're asked again, you don't really remember what happened, but you remember the answer you gave. So I will have to stick with what I've been answering now for 20 years, and that is that Harry is based on a local football hero, again European football, in my hometown Molde, and his name was Harry. And it was also based on a police officer in the village where my grandmother lived, and where we would go for summer holidays every year. I never saw this police officer, but my grandmother would always say to us kids that if you're not home and in bed by 8 o'clock, then Hole or Hole will come get you. So I always imagined this tall, blonde, blue-eyed, kind of scary man, and that was the combination of the two, plus a few characters from fiction, from literature and movies. I guess that was sort of the mix that made up the character of Harry Hole.
So had you been reading police procedurals as part of the crime genre before, before you came and before Harry emerged?
I had, but not a lot. I was not really that much into crime fiction. I had a few favorites, like Jim Thompson, who wrote in the 50s and 60s. A little later, or more or less at the same time as Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, but I was never a big Chandler or Hammett fan. It was Jim Thompson who would write not police procedurals, but he would write about sociopaths and from the sociopath's point of view, which I found quite interesting. So it was sort of American Psycho 30 years or so before Bret Easton Ellis wrote that book.
It's the very, very dark side of noir. And I think what's interesting is that your series has actually, over the years become darker, I would argue, and darker and darker and more noir. so that when people talk about, you know, Nordic noir, I think, oh, Joe Nesbø is about the darkest you can get.
Well, I think that I probably have one foot in the tradition of the Scandinavian noir, as it's now called, which is probably more a social realism. It's in the tradition of Sjöwall and Wahlöö, the Swedish crime writers who would, in Scandinavia, sort of take the crime novel from the kiosks and into the serious bookstores, and they had a political agenda, criticizing society, and that became sort of the trademark of Scandinavian crime fiction in the 70s and 80s and 90s, I guess. So I mean, coming from Scandinavia, obviously I have one foot in that tradition. My other foot, though, is probably planted somewhere in the United States. My father grew up in Brooklyn, and when I grew up in Oslo, he would always feed us American fiction. So I was also partly influenced by the hard-boiled American detective novels of the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Thinking about where Harry is now, I mean, I came across a lovely line that you wrote, which is, you said, Harry is like all of us. We fall apart. The only question is how fast. And it's, you know, given Harry's been going now for what, 23 years, he's obviously aging a little bit slower than the rest of us, potentially, but he seems to be increasingly damaged. And the Harry in the Bat, yeah, he's tall, he's blonde, he seems to be very attractive to women, he's not drinking, and then he falls off the wagon. Did you have it all there, or has he evolved as you've gone along?
I think he has evolved, but I mean, I've never reread any of my books apart from The Bat, which I read for radio. And I was surprised because this was probably 10 years after the book was published, and I realized that he was more fully formed in The Bat than I would have thought. Of course, he has developed, and also we get as a writer, I'm probably drilling deeper into his emotions, motives, and his moral codes or lack of moral codes. So I think it's not only Harry who's changing, but it's probably the view angle that it's Harry. I mean, in the first couple of books, he was sort of the more or less neutral eye behind the camera. He was our eye into what was going on, and then gradually he has moved in front of the camera and become the focus of attention. It's no longer stories about murders and their motives. I mean, it's that too, but mainly it's a story about, it's a tragedy about a character who is, like you said, slowly falling apart.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that I'm interested in, which is that often one finds with crime writers, they actually start to write less as they go on, but your books are actually getting much bigger. And I also wondered if you, when you wrote the first one, I know that you've now evolved a strategy where you write a synopsis before you actually start. You write quite a long synopsis so you know where you're going. Did you have that at the beginning? And how come you've expanded? Is that because it's more reflective, because it's more about Harry?
About the books getting bigger, I don't know really. It's I think it may have to do with the fact that I write synopsis, and I find pleasure in having plots that will hopefully manipulate the readers. I mean, though in the Harry Hole series, I'm writing who's done it stories, and you try to come up with a plot, something that a trained and intelligent audience haven't seen or haven't read before. So I guess that's the reason the books, they need some more twists and bends that they did in the start. For my first novel, The Bat, I didn't write a synopsis at all. I sort of came up with the story, like you said, on the flight from Oslo to Sydney, but that's at that time 33 hours. So that was enough time to come up with a story, which took me the next 5 weeks to write. And I just, I got off the plane, I checked into a hotel, and it was in the middle of the night, but I was jet lagged, so I couldn't sleep. So I started writing about this guy, Harry Hall, who came to Sydney and checked into the same hotel I was staying at, and he couldn't sleep because he was jet lagged. As simple as that.
Yes. And the thing is, we can't say a great deal about The Knife, because the thing is, if we start talking about the plot, we give too much away. And I don't actually want to give the reader anything in advance. I don't want to tell them anything about what's happening in that book, except to say, you really did misdirect me beautifully. I thought I'd got it about a third of the way through, and then you turned it on me and I went, oh, clever. I didn't see that one coming at all. So, you have got that capacity to really manipulate the narrative in certain kinds of ways. I want to come back to it. It's not quite the Valo and Stjårwall question, but it is about the focus on Oslo. And again, one of the things I love about The Knife, and I've loved about your books, is the fact you give us a map, and that we're overlaying this fiction on a reality, and that you're commenting about the political situation. And there's some lovely commentary in The Knife about, locales and people with Audis that are not too flash, and the fact that everybody in Norwegian now knocks off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But there is a way in which you are also commenting about the political situation of Norway, and quite acutely. And obviously that's part of the pleasure of writing these books, right?
It is, but still it's, the tradition of the political Scandinavian crime fiction, which was very important in the 80s and maybe also early 90s. They had a clear political agenda, mostly left-wing writers at that time, and I never, and also, if you look at Swedish writers like Mankell and especially Stig Larsen, they definitely have had a political agenda. I don't have, I have an agenda, but it's my way is not to show my cards, or to come out swinging and telling you what is right and what is wrong. But I will ask questions that will make the readers think. At least it makes me think, the questions I'm struggling with. But I try to present different viewpoints, different characters having a political opinion, and it's not like the good guys presenting what I think will represent my political view, and the bad guy will represent the opposite. Actually, in some cases, it might be vice versa. And I've been asked, quite a few times, what are your real political views? What are your... And it's not like I need to keep it a secret, but I think that I can, as a reader, my reaction whenever I read something that I can see from early on in the story has a clear political agenda, is to find or to take the stand of the other side. I get irritated when I feel that somebody is trying to manipulate me, politically or otherwise. So I try to keep an open mind, but it doesn't mean I don't have a moral code or political views.
No. Well, that commentary is kind of like an undercurrent in the books, but I want to just jump sideways a moment, because I also do quite a lot of research around television crime drama, and one of my absolute favorites of recent years was Occupied, which was the series that you devised and came up with. And I just wondered if you could tell people a little bit about that series, because if people haven't seen it, they've got to see it. And it was, in fact, Norway's most expensive television series and most successful, I believe, internationally.
Well, the idea, the concept of the story is that Norway, being a small country, having a border to one of the superpowers, Russia, is occupied by Russia. The point is not that it's Russia. The point is that it's a big and powerful country, and it's a very soft. We call it the silk occupation, meaning that what the Russians want is to take over the oil production in Norway, because Norway is threatening to stop producing oil because we have a green government. And so the Russians have like an unofficial agreement with other superpowers and the EU and the United States that, okay, they will support the rest of the world with oil, so they won't come to Norway's rescue. And so it's a story about what do you do in a country when you are occupied, but there's no military action, there's no bombs, no firing. Actually, you keep all your privileges in one of the richest countries in the world. You can still go to London for your football matches, or to Barcelona for your shopping. You can seemingly, you have the same TV shows, the same football matches on TV. And so what do you do when seemingly your life hasn't changed? What does words like freedom and democracy and independence really mean? And what would you as an individual be willing to risk in order to fight for those values that we claim, that we hold high? And of course, it's very different from each individual, and it's also a probably what I'm doing is asking the question that my generation ask ourselves: what would we have done if we lived during World War II, when Norway was occupied by the Germans? Would we be in the resistance movement? Would we join the Germans, or would we do like, 95% of Norwegian population did, which is nothing. Just keep your head low and try to get on with your life as best you can.
Yeah. So it's got that metaphorical element, but it's also got a very strong environmental message. I think it's been described by some people as being, climate fiction, in the sense of being a commentary on what the alternatives were, because Norway could go for a different source of energy in the series, which is thorium, and yet the EU and Russia want the oil and the gas. So there's also something very contemporary in there, which really resonated, I think.
Yeah, I agree. But then again, I didn't write the script. I just had the basic idea for the TV series, and presented a few pages on the context of the story, and then there were other writers who who did a brilliant job. But for some reason, I get the credit for that too, which is not fair.
It's lovely, but apart from the Harry Hole series, you've also produced quite a few standalones, and I'd like to talk about the standalones, because of course we've got where's it gone? Here it is. We've got The Kingdom just out now, which I've just read as well, and so I'd like to talk about your strategy in the standalones and how you fit those in around the Harry Hole, and how they came about, and perhaps what they enable you to do that you can't do with Harry.
Well, first of all, I don't really have a strategy. It's my writing is based on whatever idea I come up with that fans me, or that makes me want to get up in the morning and write. And sometimes that is a Harry Hole novel, and sometimes it's a standalone. So whenever I'm asked, when are you going to write the Harry Hole novel, I truly don't know. It all depends on that, me getting the right idea. There is like an arc for Harry. I have an idea for his life, professionally and privately, and I still follow that arc. But when I'm going to write the next story, I don't know. So the standalones, it's whenever I come up with an idea, something I really need to write, and I realize that this is not a Harry Hole story. So I've been writing children's books, I've been writing short stories, I've been writing for the stage, I've been writing for TV or movie scripts. So it's not like I have this Harry Hole thing that I'm doing, and then I put in other things. I put as much effort into everything I'm writing, actually. So, but the latest book, The Kingdom, that was me writing about brothers, because I have two brothers, and there is so much sides to the brother relationship that and it's strange I haven't written about that before. I've been writing about father and son a lot, and but as close as a relationship as I had with my two brothers, it's I've been asking myself, why haven't I touched on that topic yet? But in The Kingdom, it's about typically the two brothers, the strong loyalty, the feeling of being an unstoppable team towards the outside world, but on the inside, within the family, how vulnerable you are. And it's a younger brother, Carl, who is the Achilles heel of the older brother, Roy, who's trying to protect him. And it's sort of a I guess as a crime writer, you can learn a lot from the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen, because he's writing. I actually saw one of his plays 2 days ago, and it's always inspiring, because he has this technique of showing you sort of a normal family life with a few conflicts, and then those tiny conflicts are slowly expanding into the revelation of deep, dark family secrets, and that is, I guess, exactly what I'm doing in The Kingdom.
And those deep, dark family secrets, that relationship, that's what gives your books kind of that global transnational appeal. But what gives them the other additional kind of why we love to read them is the business about landscape, about place, about where this is set, with these brothers having this place on the top of a mountain that they, one of them wants to turn into a kind of resort. And I had a quite a nice time this afternoon looking up the dotterel as a little bird. And it turns out there's an Australian dotterel, but it doesn't do the same things as your dotterel. And I was wondering, how often do you come across a dotterel? Tell people about the dotterel.
I don't know. What is the name of the bird in Norwegian? Because you probably don't have that. So I have no idea what bird you're talking about, because there's about a dozen birds, different birds in the book, because the main character, Roy, who is the sort of the more darker introvert guy who's running the local gas station, and who is staying in this small village, while his younger brother Carl, who is more the good-looking, charming, extrovert guy, is going to the United States to study. And like you said, he's coming back, and he's going to save the village by building this big spa hotel, and all the inhabitants in the village is going to be investors in this big project. While Roy is there with his birds. He's not that interested in people. He's interested in birds, and there's especially one bird, which in Norwegian is called heilo, and that might be the bird that you're talking about. And the heilo is making one sad note. It's like it's singing. You can tell from the singing, it's just one note, but it can make that one note sound so sad. And it's whenever it finds somebody who is walking in the mountains by himself or by herself, the bird will follow that man or woman and sing for him, but will not get too close. So it's like somebody who's looking for a friend, looking for company, but is too shy to get too close. And that is, of course, then the personality of Roy.
That is lovely. And that's the plover. The dotterel is the one that pretends to be dead to protect its egg. And that was a beautiful one too. See, there's so much in crime fiction.
That is the male bird who is protecting the nest, while opposite from what we used to. It's a male who is protecting the egg, while the female is out, probably having another sex partner.
Yes. So you're putting these birds in, but you're thinking very carefully about how you're using them, because they all have metaphoric resonance in the book.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the purpose.
No, it's great. I love that. And the other thing, to just as we're sort of opening out into a sort of more in going to be asking for questions in the next 5 minutes. So if you've got a burning question, get ready to ask Joe. But I also wanted to ask you about Harry's record collection, because this is the other thing. You're reading crime fiction, you're reading for the story, but there's all this other stuff going on. And I'm intrigued by Harry's record collection. Is this your taste in music, or have you given Harry a different taste in music to your own?
No, I must admit that there's a big overlap in taste in popular culture, both music and movies. But I am, of course, a bit disappointed in Harry that he is not a big fan of my band, Didaria. I have no explanation for that, but we haven't been mentioned at all in his record collection or in any conversation.
That is very sad. This is not a good thing. I've got one other thing to ask you before we open it up, and that is, you just said that the birds didn't translate very well. Have you read your work in English in translation? Have you been aware of anything that is, it may not be a particular word, but anything that is quite hard to translate from the Norwegian into the English? So it's sort of concept or a way of thinking about space or the world or whatever that is quite hard to get across.
I think that the hardest things are probably humor, sort of an understated humor that sometimes have to do with a choice of words, that you choose words that are slightly archaic or slightly understated or overstated, to find the corresponding words in English. That is probably very difficult, and so I know that I've been really happy with both my translators in English, and I did read paragraphs in my first novel, The Bat, but I realized that the things that got lost in translation, but because obviously, I mean, it's inevitable that things will get lost in translation. I couldn't have fixed it. I didn't have a better solution. So I decided that I will just save myself the frustration of, seeing what gets lost in translation and not to read the translation. So I just trust my translator. And I mean, when you write in a small language like Norwegian, the English translation is actually quite important, because when you get translated to languages like Korean, for example, they probably won't use the Norwegian original text, but the English translation.
So you've only had 2 translators. That's quite interesting. So you've worked closely with 2 of them over all this time.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. So they must know your work
Well,
extremely.
it's not completely true, but for the Harry Hole series, it's been 2.
Okay, all right. We've got quite a few questions here, Joe. So I'm going to ask this one from Jenny, who says, some of your descriptions of crime scenes are extremely lurid. I wonder whether you have an evil streak within you to enable you to imagine and describe such horror.
Probably. I don't know. It's I think, Bob, when I was a kid, I was very afraid of the dark. You know, I mean, I couldn't watch horror movies because I would get too scared, and it was always like my imagination was running wild, and I was probably more scared of my own fantasy than whatever I could see in real life or in the movies. And I think I still use that. You know, whatever I find scary, it's I imagine that other people will find scary. I can remember when we grew up, the kids, when we were staying in the summer house, and we would stay in the attic or the loft to sleep there. We would tell ghost stories, and I was the youngest kid, but the other kids would ask me to tell the ghost stories, and for many years I thought it was because they thought I was a good storyteller, but then later they told me that no, it was because I got so engaged in the story that they could hear the fear in my voice when I was telling the stories.
So you managed to terrify yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Question from Richard. He says, I'm wondering if and when Harry will become the center of a new TV series that we absolutely must watch, or indeed if there are film projects hiding in the wings.
Well, what I can tell you is that we're working on a TV series right now, but it's early days, and it's like with any of these projects, it probably won't happen. That's if you look at the statistics. It's there are so many projects and so few projects that end up on the screen, but we'll see. I'm enthusiastic right now about the prospects of having Harry in a quality TV series. But if it doesn't have I mean, there's never any guarantee that a movie or a TV series will be good. But if you have the right talent and the resources, at least there's a higher probability that it will be good, and that's what we're working on right now.
So would they adapt the books, or would you go for new storylines?
That would be adapt the books. Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't seem to hurt, in fact, when books are adapted for the screen that people have possibly read before. No, I don't think so. I mean, I watch movies based on books I've read, so it's sort of a I don't reread books, but it's in a movie, it's always a chance that they will that it will be a slightly different story, like like with the Snowman. I mean, it was the way Thomas Alfredson did the movie. It was totally different from the book, which was his choice and his and I respect his integrity as an artist, that he had the courage, just to make another story based on his own relationship and experience from childhood, that he made it his story. Yeah. Okay, we've got another question here from the email address is Hugo Charles Hansen, and I'm going to ask, I think they're emailing from Norway, or they're signing in from Norway, and I can't quite follow the question. So I'm going to ask them to send it again and move on to David's, who says, are there any Australian authors that you admire? And I'm wondering if he means crime writers or authors generally. I don't know.
I did read, that was quite a few years ago. I did read an Australian crime writer that I quite liked, but right now I'm sorry, I can't remember the name.
It might have been Peter Temple, because he traveled internationally and got the crime writers.
Yeah, I read him. It was not the name I was thinking of, but
Right.
I'll tell you if I
comes back to you. Okay, we'll put that one on hold. Okay, this is one about Harry and his love of music. I thought that might come up. Mr. Nesbø, who are your favorite bands, and who is your #1 fave Aussie band?
My favorite Aussie band. Well, I will have to say that I was in a Nick Cave concert, just him playing the piano, last year here in Oslo, and it was great. So right now, if you ask me right now, I would have to say Nick Cave.
I think he gets mentioned in the books too, doesn't he? Harry mentions Nick Cave.
Yes, yeah. Would be strange if it's not mentioned. So I guess it is. Yeah.
Okay, we've got another question from Charlene, and I'm very happy that this one cropped up because she says, thank you for a most interesting chat. Love all the Harry Hole novels, but I also loved your Macbeth and the way the key characters are depicted in a contemporary context. How did you come up with these contemporary depictions of the Shakespearean characters? That was your first standalone, wasn't it?
No, I had a few before that. It was Headhunters and The Sun.
Right.
But again, it's hard for me to remember, exactly how I came up with the ideas. But it was, of course, I was always fascinated with the story of Macbeth, and I was also fascinated with the movie Get Carter. And
it's in my hometown,
Newcastle. Yeah. And it was this was in the 70s, which, as you maybe know, you are younger than me, of course, but I was there in the 70s, and it was quite a different city back then, industrialized and much more dirtier than it is now. And it was as so I guess Macbeth was a combination of the atmosphere of the sort of gloomy atmosphere of a city, maybe Newcastle or Glasgow or Bergen in Norway, where it's constantly raining, and of course the sort of the big tragedy, the ultimate tragedy, and the introspection of the morality of what at the beginning of the story seems to be our hero, but who gradually turns into the villain.
Yeah. We've got a little paperback copy of Get Carter from the 70s. And I just have to say, I think it was one of Michael Caine's most extraordinary performances.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and if I can say, I was in South Shields, which is near Newcastle, in the 1970s, and my school was on top of a pit heap. So yeah, I was there in the smog and the grime. Here's a question about research, which is typically, how much time do you spend in research before you start writing each new Harry Hole book? And loves the series, by the way, but how much time do you spend in that incubation period, I guess?
Well, it depends. And sometimes I do research as I'm writing. It's not like I have a prep period before I start writing, doing research. So I don't know, but quite a lot. Sometimes, of course, you have to be careful. I think that sometimes if you spend too much time doing research, it may become a distraction because you're writing a story of fiction. And also you may get tempted if you invest too much time in doing research to put all that research into your book, although it doesn't have anything to do with the story. It's sort of a way to justify all the time you have spent doing research. So I try to do a reasonable amount of research, not use it all, but just to get that sort of authority in your voice as a storyteller, knowing that you know what you're talking about. On the other hand, there also may be details where I pretend that I have deep knowledge of something, but actually the only things I know are exactly what is in the writing. You know, that's it. It's very shallow kind of knowledge.
Okay. Now, this is one of those questions which I kind of like because they're quite challenging. This puts you on the spot. It says, how difficult would it be for you to write a dialogue between Harry and Roy, the character in The Kingdom? Because one's from the country and one's from the city. They're not the most talkative ones. All the best, Hugo from Mo i Rana, Norway. Does that sound familiar?
No, but what does sound familiar is not only Mo i Rana, which is a city in the north of Norway, but that you have the not very talkative, stereotypical Norwegian males. They would do a lot of nodding, slow nodding, and spitting, I guess. That is the small nodding is like I know what you mean. Say no more. I got you. And the spitting is meaning I don't agree. Yeah, a few words and a lot of nodding and spitting. Yeah.
Well, as I told you before we started, I'm married to a Norwegian American, and I know about the nodding. Thank God he doesn't spit.
Okay.
He's not allowed to disagree. This is a question that everyone wants to know because people are fascinated with the lives of authors, you know, how you actually do it. And she says, I love your books and have read most. I'm interested in your writing routine. Do you set a time to write each day? Do you have a warm up before you begin, or do you just get stuck in? People love to know these questions. How do you do it?
Myself, I don't have, I really don't have a routine. It's, I mean, I started writing quite late in life when I was in my mid-30s. I mean, I've been writing before that, but that would be lyrics for my band and just small stories for my own amusement. But so when I started writing, it was something I felt privileged that I would have time for writing, and it was something I would. I mean, don't tell my publisher, but it's something I would do for free. And I still have that feeling, you know. It's when I wake up in the morning and I know that, okay, so here's another day where I get to write. So it doesn't feel like work, and partly I guess because I don't organize it like work. It's not like I have an office where I spend so and so many hours each day. It's when I feel like writing, I write, and that could be anywhere and at any time. It could be days where I don't write. It could be that I write constantly when I'm traveling, doing something else. You know, I will write in the airport, on planes, in the hotel room, and I just can't stop. And I try to keep it that way. That it is something that I never feel I have to do, but something I get to do. And I guess not having a routine is part of maintaining that feeling.
Yeah, great. Question about, you mentioned earlier on Bret Easton Ellis as a great author. This is Justin asking this question. And a great author dealing from the criminal psycho perspective. Can I ask, he asks, what other authors you recommend from this angle? Now, we've mentioned Jim Thompson. Who else sits within that kind of arena?
Mm,
I'm thinking
well,
George Carol's zombie.
I think that we before we started, we talked about you having had a talk with Michael Connolly.
Yes.
I think he has that. I think that Dennis Lehane has that. I mean, I can mention many writers, but I think that we mentioned the playwright Henrik Ibsen. He has that. I mean, if you go back to the classics, of course, Fyodor Dostoevsky had that. I guess most of the really great writers, they had this insight in the dark side of the human psyche, and they also had the understanding that morality is not something that is written in stone. It's not something we are born with. That human behavior is can't be defined by morality alone, because morality are just rules that we use to have an efficient and a working society. And whenever the society needs to change those rules, it will do so, and we will quickly follow. I mean, just in my lifetime, you could look at, for example, the morality around sexuality. I mean, I'm 60 now, and I grew up in a generation where homosexuality was considered a perverted sexuality, and in Norway and UK, I mean, you can actually go to jail for being homosexual. While nowadays, I mean, in Sydney and elsewhere, you have parades celebrating sexuality in general, and people not having the same preferences when it comes to sex, which is, of course, a great thing. But it just goes to show that how morality and moral codes can change very quickly. And so I find that books that deals with morality and human behavior are interesting to me. And, you know, although I write crime fiction, or maybe because I'm writing crime fiction, that is exactly what I'm writing about, you know, moral dilemmas, and trying to get at least 2 points of view on a specific action, a specific bad deed. How bad is it? And could you, the reader, have done the same thing given the same circumstances? So I think, to me, that's interesting both to read about and to write about.
Well, it's an invitation for people to increase their kind of empathy for human beings more generally, isn't it? I mean, and that's why we read, is it not? To understand how other people, to walk in other people's shoes and see how they see the world.
Yeah, I think it's not about necessarily about moral relativism. I mean, there is a friend of mine who also worked in the foreign department, foreign policy, who said that he said, you know, you have to understand where people are coming from, and you have to be able to understand different society, different cultures. But it comes to a point where it's either your way or their way. And in that crossroad, you have to make a choice. And then you have to go for your own values and fight for them. And but it doesn't mean that your own values are does have like are eternally better than the other values. But at that time, in that culture, in your life, you will fight for what will work for your society. And there's a I was just reading about a book about diplomacy over the last 3,000 years, and the author claims, and it's very interesting, that no matter what country you look at, no matter what a political system you look at, or wars, whether it's a Nazi regime, communism, democracy, feudal societies, there is no moral higher ground. That is quite an extreme opinion, of course, and I'm not 100% sure he's right, but it's interesting that, you know, the concept that there is absolutely no higher moral ground. At least I think that's good to keep in the back of your head.
I think we've got time for one quick last question.
Sorry, we seem to have activated my phone.
Oh,
something
that's right. That's interesting.
Now it's off. Yeah.
Okay, good. I've got one last question for you, which is a future-facing one, which is, will Harry's life and investigations going forward reflect the current world conditions? COVID-19, BLM, Me Too?
It probably will. I mean, it's there's no point in trying to write something in a society where nothing has happened. I mean, it was any literature, I think, will reflect what's going on in the mind of the writer. They say that every writer is writing about his or her own life, and our lives are, of course, influenced by what's going on around us. But in Harry's case, especially, I think that definitely he will. It's more interesting to write about a society that is similar to what we see around us. Of course, Harry's world is slightly heightened reality, and the Oslo is not 100% the real Oslo. It's sort of but it's 95%. It's like a slightly Gotham version of Oslo.
That's wonderful. Look, Joe, thank you so much. I'm sorry there was still more questions to go. There were so many questions for you, which I think demonstrates how invested people are in your work. And it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'm going to pass back.
Nice talking to you to speak, and thank you so much to the readers for the questions.
Yes, thank you, everybody. So back to Catherine for good night and farewell, and where to buy the books.
Absolutely. Very important part of the event. Thank you so much, both Joe and Sue. Interesting as always I find anyway, to get to those moral questions, those big moral questions, which are there in all crime fiction. People think it's just a fun read, but actually it's looking at really important things about our society. So if you don't yet have both the books Sue mentioned, or you need any of Joe's books, jump online, go to our online bookseller partner, Dimmock's. You can just search Dimmock's Bag Sydney and you can get books. Now, Joe can't sign them online, but we thought about this, and he signed a special book plate, which you will be sent when you buy your books. And thank you very much for doing that, Joe. We hope we'll see you in Sydney again before too long, when we're allowed to travel again. And I'm just briefly going to tell everyone about our next event. So we have 7 events. The next event is 10 a.m. with Karen Slaughter. So we're going to America. Jump onto our website and get a ticket if you haven't already got one. And enjoy that. But now please join me, all of you, in thanking Joe Nesbø and Sue Turnbull and giving a sort of silent applause from wherever you are. Thank you so much, and see you again.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.